Welcome to your deep dive. I am really excited to kind of get into this topic with you. The Enneagram. You shared Ennea-Type Structures with us, and wow, it's dense. But don't worry, we're here to make sense of it all together. I have to admit, I was a little overwhelmed when I first cracked it open, but thankfully, our expert is here to help us navigate.
It is rich material, that's for sure, chock full of insights.
Mm.
And what we're going to uncover here is how our personalities are really strategies for seeking fulfillment, that sense of truly being. But the Enneagram suggests we often look for it in all the wrong places.
I like that. That's a good way to frame it. It's not just about, giving ourselves a label, but understanding the why we do what we do. Now, the source material mentions this fourth way approach. What exactly does that mean?
Good question. The fourth way, as described by Claudio Naranjo, differentiates between our essence, which is our true self, and our personality. The source material often refers to personality as ego, which is essentially the collection of conditioned patterns we develop over time.
So it's like we have this pure essential self, and then, life kind of shapes the personality we present to the world.
Precisely. And according to this framework, our personalities, or egos,
Hmm.
arise from early experiences of pain and frustration. As children, when faced with difficult emotions, we create patterns to cope. But these patterns, over time, can lead to a sort of, you could almost say, sleepwalking state. We become less conscious and more robotic in our reactions.
That's kind of unsettling when you think about it. So our everyday habits and reactions could be signs of this sleepwalking state.
It's definitely something to consider. And that's where the Enneagram comes in. It's a visual map, and each point represents a different passion or dominant emotional pattern. Now, before we get into all 9 types, the source material emphasizes the core triangle. These 3 passions are really the foundation of the whole system.
Okay, so what are those? What are those foundational passions?
At the top of the triangle, we have sloth. Now, this might sound counterintuitive, but it's described as a fundamental laziness of the psyche. It's a disconnection from our true being, and it actually sets the stage for the other passions.
Sloth. I usually think of that as just being lazy, but you're saying it's a lot deeper than that.
Exactly. It's a loss of contact with our true selves or vitality. And from this lack of grounding arises fear, this second point of the triangle.
Okay, so because we're not fully connected to ourselves, fear creeps in.
Yes. And the source is very specific about this type of fear. It's a fear of being unworthy, not being okay, not having a solid foundation. To cope with this fear, we develop a false self, a mask, or persona. This is where the third passion, pride, comes in.
So we build up this image of ourselves, basically, to hide the fear.
Absolutely. We begin to identify with this mask, inflating our sense of self to compensate for that lack of true being. It's a classic defense mechanism.
Okay, so we have sloth leading to fear, leading to pride. But how does this triangle actually play out in real life? I'm having a hard time picturing it.
Well, what's fascinating is that these 3 passions create a vicious cycle. The source explains how pride, although it seems like a way to feel better about ourselves, it actually leads to further disconnection from our true being. The more we cling to our inflated self-image, the less in touch we are with our, true selves. And that, of course, just fuels the fear.
So it's like we're constantly trying to fix a problem with a solution that actually makes it worse.
Exactly. Now, the source material has some really interesting examples that kind of bring these types to life. For example, it describes those dominated by sloth, referred to as type 9, as being contented and generous, but lacking inwardness. They resist change. Their motto is essentially, don't rock the boat.
So they might seem peaceful on the surface, but there's a deeper disconnect happening.
Precisely. Now, when describing fear-dominated types, type 6, the source highlights this concept of the persecuted persecutor. They fear authority, yet they can become very critical and judgmental towards others.
It's almost like they're projecting their fear outward.
You got it. And then with pride, or type 2, the source quotes Samuel Butler's characters, which describes them as generous enough and would give away liberally what belongs to another person.
Huh. I know a few people like that, always trying to help, even when it's not their place.
It's a great example. And what's interesting is that each type represents a different way we seek fulfillment, but it's always distorted, always driven by that underlying fear or lack.
So we're all looking for that sense of being, but maybe in the wrong places.
That's the core idea. And the source material offers some compelling examples beyond the core triangle. Let's take type 1, for instance, often called the anger type. They're driven to be perfect, seeking worthiness through rigid rules and self-control. However, this often masks a deep-seated anger and frustration, a feeling that things aren't right and need fixing.
So they're trying to create a sense of order and control in the world so they can feel okay.
Yes. And then we have type 4, the envy type. They're fixated on what they lack, always seeking fulfillment through intense emotions and romantic ideals. However, this often leads to self-sabotage and suffering, as they're constantly comparing themselves to others and feeling inadequate.
So even though these types seem very different, they're both rooted in this same idea of trying to compensate for a perceived lack.
Precisely. Remember, the source material delves much deeper into each type, but for now, we're focusing on this underlying pattern. This idea that our personalities are strategies for seeking being, but often in ways that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering.
This is already making so much sense. It's like I'm seeing the world and myself through a whole new lens.
That's the power of the Enneagram. It's a tool for self-awareness and understanding, but it's also a pathway to something more.
I can't wait to learn more about that pathway. But for now, I think we need to take a moment to digest all this. I'm already feeling my mind expand. Wow, so much to think about. We've been talking about how the Enneagram reveals our personalities as different ways of kind of searching for that sense of being, but often in ways that don't really, work.
That's right. And what I find really insightful is how the source material connects these personality types to specific cognitive errors, what it calls fixations.
Right. It's not just about our emotions and behaviors, but how we actually see and interpret the world.
Exactly. Each type has a unique way of perceiving reality.
Yeah.
And it kind of reinforces their dominant passion. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of these fixations? I'm curious to see how this works.
Absolutely. Let's look at type 1, the anger type. Their fixation is perfectionism. They have this deep-seated belief that things should be a certain way, and they get frustrated and angry when they're not.
So their whole worldview is filtered through this lens of right and wrong.
Yes. And it's not just about external things. They often hold themselves to incredibly high standards, constantly striving for flawlessness. This can manifest as a hyper-focus on details, a need for order and control, and a tendency to be very critical, both of themselves and others.
Right. It's like they're always trying to maintain this sense of order to avoid feeling that anger.
Precisely. And this fixation keeps them trapped in that cycle. The more they try to perfect things, the more they find imperfections. It's a never-ending battle.
Okay. Sounds exhausting. So what about type 2, the pride type? What's their fixation?
Well, their fixation is false love. They believe they can earn love and worth by being excessively helpful and giving. They create this image of themselves as, the good one, the one who always puts others first.
So they're seeking being through kind of the approval and validation of others.
Exactly. And it's often unconscious. They may genuinely believe they're being selfless, but underneath there's a need to feel needed and loved.
It's like their whole sense of self-worth is dependent on how other people see them.
Yes. And this can lead to unhealthy patterns like codependency, people-pleasing. They tend to take on more than they can handle.
I can see how that ties back to the pride we talked about earlier. It's like they're inflating their importance by, being the indispensable one.
You're right. And because their sense of self is so fragile, they're extremely sensitive to any kind of criticism or rejection.
Wow. That sounds emotionally turbulent. Okay, so each type has this core passion and then a fixation that reinforces that passion. What about type 3? What's their story?
Well, type 3, the vanity type, is fixated on deception. They're so focused on image and success that they often lose touch with their true selves. They become masters at presenting this, polished, appealing facade to the world.
So similar to type 2, they're seeking being through external validation.
Yes, but for type 3, it's more about achievement and recognition than love and approval. They're driven to climb the ladder of success, often at the expense of their own well-being and authenticity.
Right. It's almost like they're constantly performing, even if the audience is only in their head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this can lead to a sense of emptiness, even when they achieve what they thought they wanted. Because they're so disconnected from their true selves, they never quite know who they are or what they truly value.
Yeah, that makes me think of that saying, it's lonely at the top. They achieve all this outward success, but it doesn't really bring them the fulfillment they were looking for.
That's a great connection. It's like they're chasing a form of fulfillment that's ultimately illusory. Now, this brings us to type 4, the NG type. Their fixation is dissatisfaction. They're constantly comparing themselves to others, focusing on what they lack and romanticizing what they don't have.
So they're caught in this cycle of longing, yearning, never feeling good enough.
Precisely. They have this idealized vision of how things should be, and their reality never seems to measure up. This often manifests as a tendency toward melancholy, a preoccupation with their flaws, and difficulty appreciating what they already have.
That sounds like a painful way to live, always focused on what's missing.
It can be.
Yeah.
And, because they're so fixated on their perceived shortcomings, they often struggle to connect with others authentically. They might feel misunderstood or like no one can truly relate to their pain.
Okay. So we've covered the fixations for types 1 through 4. What about type 5?
Type 5, the avarice type, is all about detachment. They believe they can protect themselves from pain and vulnerability by withdrawing from the world and hoarding their resources, both emotional and material.
So they seek a sense of safety and security through isolation.
Right. This can manifest in many ways, being emotionally distant, intellectually guarded, reluctant to share their thoughts and feelings. They often prefer to observe from a distance, avoiding close relationships or commitments.
It's like they're building a fortress around themselves to keep the world out.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And while this strategy might offer a sense of control and independence, it also leads to loneliness and disconnection.
It seems kind of paradoxical, like they're seeking fulfillment, but their very strategy prevents them from connecting with others and experiencing life fully.
It's a classic catch-22. They're afraid to lose what they have, but by clinging so tightly, they miss out on the richness of connection.
Right. Okay, what about type 6, the fear type? What's their fixation?
Well, type 6 fixates on accusation. They're constantly scanning for threats, both real and imagined, and they often project their own anxieties onto others.
So they're living in this state of hypervigilance, always on high alert for danger.
Yes, and this can lead to mistrust, suspicion,
Mm.
doubt. They have difficulty relaxing, making decisions, trusting their instincts. They often seek external sources of authority for guidance, but can also be rebellious and contrarian at times.
It's like they're caught between wanting to follow the rules and wanting to break free.
Exactly. And their fear often manifests as anger and blame. They might accuse others of being untrustworthy or incompetent as a way to deflect their own insecurities.
Oh, so it's a way of trying to control their environment by controlling others.
That's a good way to put it. And this can create a lot of conflict and tension in their relationships. They could be very loyal and supportive, but also very critical and judgmental.
Okay, so this is starting to feel like a pattern. Each type has this core fear or lack, and their fixation is a way of trying to kind of manage that fear, even if it doesn't really work. What about type 7?
Type 7, the gluttony type, fixates on fraudulence.
Mm.
They're so focused on seeking pleasure and avoiding pain
Yeah.
that they create a superficial and inauthentic
Yeah.
persona to hide their true feelings.
So they're looking for that sense of being through constant stimulation and distraction.
Exactly. And this can manifest as overindulging in food, entertainment, travel, anything that provides a temporary escape from boredom and discomfort. They often have a very charming, engaging personality, but it can be difficult to get to know them on a deeper level.
It's like they're always on the go, always looking for the next, exciting experience, but never really stopping to connect with themselves or others in a meaningful way.
You got it. And because they're so good at avoiding their own pain, they can have difficulty empathizing with others.
Yeah.
Or dealing with difficult emotions. They might also struggle with commitment and follow through, always searching for the next best thing.
Right. It's interesting how their fear of pain keeps them from experiencing the, fullness of life, both the joys and the sorrows.
That's a great observation. Now moving on to type 8, the lust type.
Okay, let's hear about type 8.
Their fixation is vengeance. They have this deep-seated belief that the world is a hostile place and they need to be strong and assertive to survive. They often have a very powerful, intimidating presence, and they can be quick to anger.
So they're seeking being through power and control.
Exactly. They see the world in terms of winners and losers, and they're determined to come out on top. They can be fiercely protective of those they care about, but also very domineering and controlling.
It's like they're always on guard, ready to fight for what they want and defend themselves against any perceived threat.
Yes. And because they value strength and power so much, they often struggle to show vulnerability.
Right.
Or admit weakness. This can make it difficult for them to form close, intimate relationships.
Okay. We've explored the fixations for types 1 through 8. What about type 9, the one we haven't talked about in detail yet?
Yes, type 9, the sloth type. Their fixation is self-forgetting. They believe the best way to avoid conflict and maintain peace is to go along with others and kind of merge with their surroundings. They're often very easygoing and agreeable, but can also be passive and indecisive.
So they're seeking a sense of being through like blending in, avoiding conflict.
Exactly. And because they're so good at adapting to others, they can lose touch with their own needs and desires. They might struggle to assert themselves, set boundaries, and can be susceptible to manipulation.
It's like they're trying to disappear to avoid rocking the boat.
That's a good way to visualize it. And while this might create a sense of harmony in the short term, it can lead to resentment and frustration in the long run. They may feel like they're living someone else's life, unable to find their own voice and purpose.
This is also fascinating. So each type has this deep-seated fear or lack, and their fixation is like a defense mechanism, a way of trying to protect themselves from that fear.
That's a great summary.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember that these fixations aren't, conscious choices. They're unconscious patterns that we develop early in life. And they can be really difficult to break free from.
Okay. So why is it helpful to understand our Enneagram type and our fixation? What's the takeaway for our listener?
Well, here's the thing. Awareness is the first step towards change. Once we see our patterns clearly, we can start to challenge them and choose a different way of being.
Okay. So it's not about like judging ourselves for having these patterns, but simply recognizing them so we can make different choices.
Exactly. It's about self-compassion and understanding. These are simply strategies we develop to navigate life. The more we understand them, the less power they have over us.
Okay, I get that. But like, how do we actually do that? How do we break free from these unconscious patterns?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've gone through all 9 types, their passions and those fixations that, kind of keep us stuck. How do we break free?
It's been quite the journey. But remember, the Enneagram is about more than just, understanding ourselves. It's also a pathway to transformation.
Okay, so let's talk about transformation. We've identified the problem, those unconscious patterns that keep us from true being. But like, how do we actually break free?
So the source material suggests that, awareness is a powerful first step, like shining a light on what's been hidden.
Right, we can't change what we don't see.
Exactly. Once we see those patterns, we can observe them in action. Notice how they show up in our thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Pay attention to how they affect our relationships, our well-being.
So it's about cultivating a sort of mindfulness around our personality patterns.
Precisely. And it's not about, judgment or self-criticism. It's about approaching ourselves with curiosity and compassion.
Right, we're not bad for having these patterns. They're just strategies we developed, to cope with life.
Exactly. And the more we understand them, the less power they have over us. We can start to see them as choices, not compulsions.
Okay, awareness is key. What else can we do to facilitate this transformation?
Well, the source emphasizes working with our virtues. Each Enneagram type has a corresponding virtue, which acts as an antidote to its dominant passion.
So it's not just about eliminating the negative patterns, but cultivating like positive qualities too.
You got it. Creating a more balanced way of being.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you give us an example? Maybe focus on 1 or 2 types so we can really grasp how this works.
Sure. Let's take type 1, the anger type.
Yeah.
Their virtue is serenity.
Mm-hmm.
By cultivating a sense of inner peace and acceptance, they can start to let go of that need to control, to perfect everything.
It's almost like finding a sense of calm in the middle of the chaos their fixation creates.
Yes, exactly. And for type 4, the envy type, the virtue is equanimity. This is about learning to appreciate the present moment, finding contentment in what they have, breaking free from that constant longing and comparison.
It sounds like it requires a real shift in perspective, going from focusing on what's missing to appreciating what is.
Exactly. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about uncovering and expressing our true essence, the qualities that are already within us.
So it's like peeling away those layers to reveal our authentic self.
Beautifully put. And it's a lifelong journey. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way. But, the more we commit to this work, the more freedom and fulfillment we experience.
I love that. This has been so insightful. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools.
That's wonderful to hear. Remember, this deep dive has just been a taste of what the Enneagram offers. Keep exploring the source material. See what resonates with you.
Absolutely. And for our listener, the most important takeaway is to, apply this to your own life. See how it can help you understand yourself and others. Use it as a guide on your journey.
Well said. As you explore, ask yourself, what aspects of your personality, resonate with these ideas? Where do you see yourself seeking being, and are you looking in the right places?
Those are powerful questions to reflect on. And I think the more we understand ourselves, the more compassion and understanding we can offer to others.
I couldn't agree more. Understanding ourselves is the foundation for understanding the world around us.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the Enneagram. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep.